Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Equine Assisted World. I got Kira Julius here, who is German and Danish, but speaks English, as you'll see, with a slightly Australian accent, because she has had a very varied career within the equine and equine-assisted world. And we're talking today about resilience in horses, resilience in people. Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the last few years, the conversations around trauma have reached a point where it leaves many of us wondering, well, okay, but what about what happens after trauma? Because one cannot, of course, spend some decades on planet Earth without traumatic things happening. But we also know that we're a resilient species and that horses are resilient. And of course, that's the great miracle. And that is, of course, the world that we are involved in. And I wanted to check in with Kira because she has been working in the sort of rehab and starting of horses, as well as in the human end of equine assisted stuff, and has been very much involved in this conversation and has some interesting insights to share, I feel, on this. She was working for quite a long time in the Stewart's Care Equine Therapy Centre outside of Dublin, which does excellent work, and also was about 8 years with a rather legendary guy called Will Rogers in Germany, who, even though he's Australian, who works with and starts young and difficult warmbloods. And she has her own stories, of course, as we all do, with the personal side. And also has worked with us here in Germany with kids with autism and so on, and now kind of has her own practice doing it. So all round, she's got interesting things to say around this business of resilience. So, Kira, thanks for coming on. Can you give us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in this whole thing? And then we can kind of go from there.
Yes. Meaning how I got involved in horses at all, or
In horses at all, and mental health and equine assisted. Yeah.
yeah. So I would say horses at all is my sister's fault because I have 3 sisters, but when I was younger, I have one older sister, and I had to do whatever she was doing, obviously. And she started riding, so I just started as well. But then I got very hooked, even though I was very scared of the horses. And I think it was probably because being with horses opens up another world for you. You know, you get to be with another species. You get to understand how they operate, how they see the world. You get to ride them, which means you get to be taller and faster and do more things that you couldn't do on your own. And then there's a whole aspect of building a relationship with an animal as magnificent as a horse and all the things you learn about yourself on the way. And so I think that's probably what kept me there, even though I was experiencing a lot of fear even as a child. But it was just never strong enough, that fear, to keep me away.
So that's interesting because, for me, I remember my early years with horses, there was just this great desire to be with them, this great desire to do stuff, and fear in certain moments, yes, that was scary. But I don't remember an overarching fear. Were you always dealing with that overarching fear?
Yes, I'd say so. And I mean, it was sometimes less and sometimes more, depending on the human environment and the horses I was with, especially when you're inexperienced, you want a secure horse. And I didn't always have that when I
Mm.
started to learn to ride. But I also realized later the human environment also mattered so much where I learned to ride. There was a lot of yelling going on and a bit of shaming. And if something went wrong, it was all your fault and all those things. So I think
Mm.
if you already come in and you're a bit cautious, then those things might create a feeling in you that it's just never quite safe.
Mm.
And that things going wrong or things getting a bit activated or whatever is never all right.
So then why did you decide to not just take a professional track with this, but the professional track of starting large, dangerous, bouncy, overreactive warmbloods for an ultra demanding German sport crowd who can A, afford these hyper expensive horses, and B, have a sort, are coming out of that same shouty, shamey world that you were talking about. It's like if you have this overarching fear, it's like you took all the aspects of that and just said, okay, I want to spend the rest of my life with that. What made you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was an important step before that, which was that when I was 16, I went to Tanzania for 6 months and worked on a horse farm where I was working a lot with young horses and I was hacking out a lot, riding along the beach a lot, taking people on trail rides. And in my time there, I got the experience that I was able to actually do things and that I enjoyed the process of figuring out what to do. They had so many horse books. So even though I didn't get a huge amount of guidance there, I had all these books and I would go and, when it was hot at lunchtime, I'd read the books and then I'd go out and try it with the horses because I had a bunch of horses I could just play with. But the environment in some way was so relaxed. The horses they were all living out. Most of them had grown up in the environment. So I guess I just experienced that so much growth in myself, so much joy also. And I had this huge curiosity about where one could take this because I felt that I was only scratching the surface
Okay.
of, what you could learn in that life with horses. And then I was always thinking, I was telling myself, well, I'm just going to take a year off after school and then I'll go to uni. And then, oh no, but I'll just try this thing and then I'll go to uni. So, but I, I took a job in a professional dressage stable just as a groom first because I felt that I couldn't live with not trying it. I
Mm.
wanted to at least have tried to know what it is like to be in the professional world.
Mm.
And then getting in there, again, you see so many things you don't know and so many ways you can still develop. And the man I was working for there, Morten Thompson, who's a very good Danish trainer and gave me a really good foundation, he then put me in touch with Will because he could see I was just interested in, the understanding of the horse, the horsemanship side of it. I was always very interested in starting young horses and really I just wanted to know how to do it in a way. Yeah,
So
so it just,
would you say that the story of your fear and overriding fear was that curiosity overrides fear, basically?
yeah, I would definitely say so. Yeah.
That, you see, I think that informs where I want to go with this, which is that there were two things that stood out for me for what you said. So you said three. So first things you said, well, I was very anxious. I did it, started because it was my sister doing it. And then I got into it and then I was a bit scared the whole time, but my curiosity, made me keep going. Then
Yeah.
you very casually said, oh no, when I was 16, I went off to Tanzania to blah, blah, blah. Now, my family's African. I was traveling around Africa from my, mid late teens. I know what that entails. I was doing that as a young male as a young female going out there by yourself, and I know that you were going to a place where there was some infrastructure and so forth, but nonetheless,
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge at 16. That doesn't sound very anxious to me. And then you say, well, then, yeah, okay, I thought I'd try to be in the professional world. But it's one thing to go to the professional world in a sort of quote unquote normal riding school, or to go get your exams, whether it's the German exams or the British exams or whatever. And it's quite another thing to sort of go straight to the very, very, very demanding, very perfectionistic world of those high level sport dressage places that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know the level of Morton that you were going into. That Tanzania, that doesn't sound like anxiety. That sounds like something else. Or how did you, as somebody riddled with anxiety or fear, find that your curiosity could override it to that degree? And then when you were there in those situations, did you not find the super anxiety coming back in? And if so, how did you deal with it? Because I think that the how did you deal with it, I think, informs the rest of where this conversation is going.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say I wasn't at that point when I went to Tanzania to do that. I wasn't with horses. I wasn't as scared anymore because I had had different experiences in between. Like, I had moved on from the place where I started to ride, and I was riding other people's ponies, just private people who had their pony stabled and needed some help. So it was much more relaxed. I didn't get in trouble as much.
And you were by then used to riding a variety of horses and thinking, oh, I can do this. I can go
Yeah,
to a
so
relatively strange horse and make it work.
yeah, and I guess when you work through things and you find out, oh, that actually worked. Oh, this actually was okay. The more you are in situations where things work out, then we're like, oh, maybe the next one will work out as well. But I think that is the big thing with if you're anxious about something, we tend to want to stop doing the thing at all. And you go, no, maybe I have to heal this thing. Maybe I have to look into this. Maybe you kind of can easily get stuck in a place where you think you have to feel ready or you have to feel not anxious at all before you can go out and do something again. When in fact, the doing of the thing is what helps you with the anxiety because you kind of allow yourself to have a different storyline rather than staying in the one that your anxious thoughts predict.
Right.
And
Right. Okay. That I think you're dead right with that. At the same time, there you are, 16 in Africa by yourself. And
oh yeah, I was yeah.
I know what it is to be in Africa by yourself as a teenager, looking around going, oh, it's a big place, isn't it? And oh, that's a huge spider on the back of my wall. And, I hope these people don't kill me. And then, of course, going into that ultra demanding world that you went into later with horses, what you must have had the freakouts come. And I also know from what you've told me, that there were some things that happened within the family that naturally was a big confidence shaker, and all
Yeah.
of that going on at the same time. Can you talk to us about the confidence shaker thing within the family? Because I think that's something that gives you a kind of a gravitas and a credibility within this kind of work. That says if you can face something like that at that age, it does give you, well, it can't destroy you or give you strength. But then also when the inevitable, like, shit, what have I done? Why am I here? What have I let myself in for? Moments happen. And then it's kind of relentless because you're there and you've got to do that job. What are
Yeah.
the tools that you drew on to that? So can you just bring us to, if that's okay,
Yeah.
what happened at home, and then maybe walk us through how that affected what you then later did.
Yeah. So at home when I was just 18, my dad had a stroke, and he was kind of he was the rock of our family. He was the one who held everything together, organized everything. He was a
Mm.
great dad. I also have a great and very loving mom, Not to say that, but he was the one who brought a lot of stability, and more so than I probably realized before that happened. And
No doubt. Yeah.
so, yeah, it was a little bit like a lot of things fell apart, and suddenly that dealing with that situation was part of our lives, and it meant, yeah, a distribution of tasks in another way. It also meant, of course, you're worried about your family member. It also meant spending time. I remember on weekends when he was in rehab, just spending weekends traveling to see him even. And then there's this all the things, even when he got back home he couldn't get around our house in a wheelchair, so we had to move. There was financial difficulties. There were all sorts of things to sort out that suddenly kind of ripped that stable foundation I felt I had for my life away. And suddenly we're like, oh,
Mm.
it can be quite vulnerable when something like that happens. And also it really tests the family bonds because you get under a lot of strain. And I mean, I'd say in some ways it has brought my family closer, which I'm grateful that we didn't fall apart over it, that we didn't lose the connections we have with each other. But yeah, for a while there, I was worried about that too, because of course there's so much going on and everyone is struggling a bit, and it, yeah, it was a lot to deal with, and I mean, of course, now in the line of work where it goes into the therapeutic context, it gives you a lot of reverence for what people are actually going through when things like that happen. Yeah,
Yeah, because your dad was never quite right after he came back, right? It's not like, well, okay, he came back in a wheelchair, but could then say, all right, I'm back at the helm, lads. I'm things are back to normal. And you had what, three other sisters?
yeah,
And perhaps your mum struggling with this situation. So having to step up into an early adult role. Talk to us a little bit about the changing relationship with your dad, because I think that that's a huge one for kids to go through. If you're lucky as a child, I think you go through that when you're in middle age or late middle age yourself, and perhaps your parent goes into decline in great old age. And I think that's difficult enough. But to see somebody in their prime who is, as you say, the rock, get knocked down and then really have to take that place for them. I know there'll be some listeners and some viewers who've probably been through something similar, or other people who have not and can't imagine this. But if we're all in this business of compassion and this, the seeking of the tools of resilience as what we do professionally, I think this gives us an awful lot of insight. Can you just free flow, like what it is at that age to go through that process just a little bit more? Because I do think I know it certainly helped me listening to your story reframe some of the ways in which I look at families and parents and so on that are coming to me. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, of course, there was a lot of grief because it felt like, in some ways, losing your dad, even
yeah.
though he was still there. But that role of maybe a father figure, I remember very distinctly. I had one situation where I had driven myself out to stable, and I was participating in a jumping workshop, and I knocked my knee really hard on a jump as I passed it, and then I remember getting in the car and it just hurting so much to press down the clutch. and then being like, oh, maybe like I can call dad and he can help me. And then I was like, shit, I can't. I have to actually get myself home here. It puts you in a position where you more so sometimes feel that at the end of the day, you have to get yourself out of trouble when you're in trouble, and you have to be responsible for yourself in a bigger way. And I think I, at the time, also felt very responsible for my younger sisters as well, which then, funnily enough, because I got so into managing mode, doing mode, in some ways kept me from connecting with them on an emotional level during that time, which now I wish
Mm,
I'd done. And at the same time, of course, I know that at that time I was just doing the best I could to kind of not fall apart myself, because I
mm,
felt like I had to keep myself together to a point where I could deal with all the practical things. Like my mom wasn't driving at the time. So anything that involved driving, which is, shopping, or one of my sisters was at boarding school and needed to be picked up in Denmark sometimes and things like that. That was my role.
mm,
And it was maybe when I was 16, 17, not the role I had envisioned for myself. I had envisioned something that felt more free. And at the same time, you just,
mm.
I think at the end of the day, it's love, You have the love for your family, so you do what you need to do, or what, to the best of your ability, what you can do to
Yeah.
support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The financial side of things must have been really worrying. When you're used to somebody being a rock, the main earner, etc., that's suddenly out of the picture. There's a bunch of you. You're young, not yet working. It affects life decisions. Do I work? Do I go to university? What do I do?
I do have to say though, my parents were they were still within that pretty good about at that time. I still felt I had the freedom to say, I mean, I made my own money to travel after school. I worked so I could travel, but I never felt like I couldn't go.
Right.
Like
I
you know?
okay, I got it. I guess what I'm driving at is there's a level of anxiety, of financial anxiety that comes in with a situation like that, and which I think all special needs families have.
Yeah.
And also this idea of being thrust into needing to take responsibility for financial management when you don't feel ready for it. Did that, did, did you end up to some degree becoming the family financial manager?
No, not
Or
at all.
did
No.
that, or were there skills that you had to learn for organization around that
Mm,
then have affected sort of how you've worked subsequently?
yeah. I mean, I didn't, my mum did take care of that side of things. And once my dad was kind of mentally able to again, like they will talk about it together and she'd, refer with him about things. But so I didn't feel that I had to take responsibility for that. But I did feel that I had to strongly take responsibility for myself.
Mhm.
I didn't know that if I go out and set up my life in a way where I can't support myself, then I do not have family money that will come up and kind of, do that for me. I did know that. So the awareness became more acute that you kind of have to, like I, at that point, my sisters also, we kind of had to support ourselves. And if there was, I was said, if I wanted to travel, so I worked so I could travel. And then I organized the traveling so that it was cheap, and let's see if I could combine it with
Mm.
work and things like that. Yeah.
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 You then, okay, you go into this very, very demanding end of the dressage world. And I know enough about that area, Warendorf in Germany, partly because we have a horseboy place. If anyone who wants to hear a great podcast, please go listen to Gitti Berghoff's podcast.
Yeah,
on
she's
here.
amazing.
She's one of the great geniuses of our work, and we interviewed her a few months ago. So please go look at that. But and she's in Warendorf, but she's obviously an exception. Warendorf is a hard place. Warendorf is where the German Olympic team have their headquarters. It's where the FN, which is the equivalent of the British Horse Society or the US Equestrian Federation, or has their headquarters. It's the sort of belly of the beast of horse riding as we know it, really, within Europe, I'd say. And it comes with all of the things attached to it that one would expect with that. And you go into that.
Yeah, yes and no.
Why? You have all this anxiety, you have these other, it's like you couldn't have chosen a more rake yourself over the coals type of environment to go
Well,
into.
the thing is, I kind of went into that, but not really. Because, I mean, first we were in the Netherlands, actually. We were only in Germany for the last 5 or 6 years of my time with Will. But so, yes, it was in that sports world. That was a client base, but we kind of had our own little niche within it.
Okay.
That meant that there was some rules we could write in a different way because the work with the horses was not about competing them. It was about solving problems that our clients couldn't solve oftentimes, or starting horses. But even the horses we got into start would often be the ones that were extra sensitive or extra sharp or had already had a bad experience of being started. Things
I rest
like
my case about anxiety. These are anxious-making horses in anxious-making situations with somewhat high anxiety clients. Okay, I like your thing about the niche, finding your niche within something. I think that's something we should actually return to a bit later in this conversation, because I think that's important, this idea of how you find and carve out your niche. But nonetheless, how did you end up? Do you think to some degree you wrote yourself that script to say, because I feel so much anxiety, I'm going to deliberately put myself into situations like Tanzania or this that constantly trigger it? Do you think, if so, was that conscious or subconscious? And if so, was that because there was another part of you that thought, well, yeah, the triggering is the growth? And was that conscious or unconscious?
Yeah, I mean, I think there might have been some of that. I do remember that I often had the feeling of not wanting to get stuck in my comfort zone
Okay.
and feeling that there was more
But
and there was
why?
something
Why?
bigger.
Because
Well, it is
what?
the growth thing, I think. And I think we all come to Earth with our
Stuff.
souls that kind of feel that there is some journey they want to take, there's some growth they want to have. And
Yeah.
that we then, in some ways, subconsciously, but I mean, I think the longer you go on, the more conscious it becomes, choose situations that put you, put you in line for kind of learning experiences that will give you that growth that you are actually craving. Because yes, I was craving
Mm.
that growth. And I also felt, because you said, why didn't you just go to a riding school or whatever? I felt that I wanted, if I was going to go into it professionally, I was like, then I wanted to do like the top tier thing, because I always felt I wanted to have the fullest, deepest experience I could have of it. Because I also feel it's that sense of wanting to feel aliveness. Because don't we all want to
The sense of wanting
feel
to feel aliveness. I like.
alive, you know? And I always feel that the richer your experience is, the more that life comes up in you, and the more you are curious about things, the more you dive deeply into things and wonder about them and just really live them, the more that vitality is gonna flow through you. Yeah.
Yeah, vitality. Okay, can you talk to us a bit about the work that you did do there then in the Netherlands and Germany? I think that's quite fascinating for us as horse people. Can you just sort of take us through the highlights of that and the approach and where it got you and then how that drifted into the therapeutic?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started out as just in a grooming position. So I was just taking care of Will's horses and the horses that he would have for training. And then I would, every opportunity I got, watch him work, watch him teach, and just get as much as I could. And then he gradually started teaching me. So I had a couple of lessons on his horses. And then I said, what I'm really interested in is starting young horses. And then what he did was he got, did I? Yeah, I think the first time I helped with that, we got two mares in from a breeder together. And then we started them at the same time, where we'd take them to the arena together. He would work with one, I would work with the other. We'd swap in between. He'd, of course, teach me and supervise closely because these are valuable horses from clients. And Will has a high standard for the work and the product he puts out and the training he has. So, of course, if I was going to do it within that business, it was closely supervised. And I learned so much. But essentially, the work was based on, we would educate mainly dressage horses. So with the aim of being dressage horses that, could be ridden competitively if that was what the owners wanted. But we always started with an approach that, well, you'd probably more see in the horsemanship world, where very much about understanding how horses operate, how they perceive the world, and then using that knowledge and the feel of that to explain the human world and the job we expect them to do to the horses. So you break it down, make the communication really clear, make sure that they understand and that they feel safe within it. So we wouldn't just slap a saddle on, for example. We'd before teach them certain groundwork patterns that we could use to release tension in their bodies. And then we'd get them used to being touched with different objects, and then get them used to pressure around the belly, and then saddle them. And then you can use all those tools that you have, because when you have the communication with the horse, if they have a moment where they tense up with the saddle or they're unsure, you have a language you can use to tell them, do this with this tension, move it here, do this. So
What are those? I think that are curious.
yeah.
Yeah, what are those
Um,
exercises to release tension?
I mean, so it starts, of course, with being comfortable with a human. That's where you have to start. So you start with them being able to be touched and feel safe with it. And we kind of used a lot with the touching things, something you call approach and retreat, meaning you approach somewhere. If the horse is uncomfortable, you can retreat to a spot on the body where the horse is comfortable, then you go further again. So you listen to the horse's signals, and there's basic handling that they could listen to our body language for, just walking with us, going forward, backing up, turning, just staying with us. And then the main thing for letting go of tension was to be able to yield the shoulders out and to yield the hindquarters out.
Mhm.
And we'd also teach a lot of them to relax in the neck, to lower the neck a bit. But that one for me is kind of, you don't want to force them to do that. And often it comes out of the movements. So it's not just about doing the movement, it's also the quality of the movement, if that makes
Right.
sense. You know
It
how you
does.
can, but it's a conversation, and you look for those places where the horse gets closer to the posture or the softness that you like. And if you release in those moments, they gradually always find, okay, in the softness is where I find the release. And then you build it. But if you constantly keep that principle in mind with whatever you do, then it just becomes stronger and stronger. It just becomes part of
I think some
the,
people are familiar with the yielding of the shoulders and the yielding of the quarters, and some people are not.
yeah.
And then there are, of course, many different ways to do this. And within the horsemanship world, one sees people doing this sometimes in a sort of a bossy way and sometimes in a very sensitive way and various points in between. How did you guys do that? And what is the value of yielding the shoulders and yielding the quarters?
So yeah, I mean, the aim is, of course, obviously you want to use as subtle an aid as you can, but we all know that when you're working with a horse who doesn't know much, but it's not about being tough, it's about being clear.
Mm.
And often if the horse doesn't move off a small or smallish aid, you can still break it down more,
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes if they so yielding the shoulders, we would yield them backwards and across, but the softness more comes from forward and across, I feel.
Yeah.
So if you imagine a horse walking around you on a small circle, if you can get the nose a bit towards you and have them reach the outside front leg out more, open up through the shoulder there, they will often find softness and a bend there that releases quite a bit of tension. But say a horse is really, really stuck, you often have to start with just, can I get lateral flexion while we stand? Can you even soften through that part in front of your shoulder? So yeah, and then the hindquarters is usually, I find, easier actually to move across, especially once you can move the shoulders, because if you just take the nose around here a little bit more, we would, and those early stages do it with a lot of bend.
Mm.
And if you just take the nose around here a bit more and you slow your own feet down and pivot more, often the hindquarters will move out automatically.
Why do you think those two movements really release tension from a horse? Just in your opinion, what do you think is
Yeah,
going on?
yeah. I mean, for one, it is because I think you get the horse's energy moving through the body in a way where it doesn't get stuck anywhere. Because you have, if you have them.
Because they don't brace. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But they can still move. And that's for
Mm.
horses, it's often important that they can still move.
Mm.
And you give them a way to move where there is actually no resistance and you're not yanking on them or anything.
Mm.
And then there's, I mean, what I've learned from you, that all the laterals, when all that crossing of the midline produces the BDNF in the brain, I think.
Brain-derived neurotrophic
Yes.
factor,
And
neuroplasticity, like
exactly.
martial arts and humans. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
like it. But
Yes,
yeah,
we
no,
do.
I think that definitely does play a role there. And also that the more aware they become of their bodies, the more secure they feel in their bodies and where they are in space. And
Yeah.
I think all those things tie in together.
Plus it's leadership, isn't it? I feel
Yeah.
safe. I have a
Yeah, it's also that
leader.
thing, especially young horses, often they will, if they're unsure of something, they will appreciate you saying, do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we do, honestly.
Yeah.
Mammalian, social
Yeah.
mammal
Yeah.
need for,
Provided, of
for
course, that
direction.
you have the trust and relationship. If they see you as a threat, then that's not very helpful. They
Yes.
have to kind of see you as someone who helps, not as someone who kind of adds to the stress. So that's where the relationship and trust is so important.
If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this. It's interesting just staying on these exercises of moving the shoulders and moving hindquarters out. This, as you know, also is the basis of all the classical or the old classical horsemanship.
Yeah.
So it's all about the lateral movement, creating the straightness and the collection and the extension in a way that then is relaxed and soft. And then the horse can, like a concertina, go from a hard run to a spin to a this to a that to whatever he needs to
Yeah.
do, whether working cattle or fighting a bull or playing sport or hunting or just having fun, of course, themselves without a human, without a monkey in the field. And I've noticed too that when, particularly with young horses, when they are in their herds, they do a lot of the lateral play themselves. They do it less as they get older, but they still do to some degree, but it's all about circling each other. And
Mhm.
I think people that don't breed and therefore don't get to see a lot of group play among adolescent horses sometimes miss that behavior. Just like if you don't keep stallions, there's behaviors you may not see. I've heard people say, oh, Spanish walk, for example, it's not natural. It's like, well, you haven't seen two stallions circle each other before they decide whether to engage. And that's, of
Yeah.
course, exactly what they do.
Yeah.
All of these things come from nature. But we, of course, have artificially or humanly affected horses by, taking off the bulls if they're stallions. That changes the behavior massively, and then of course, anytime you are adding a human to a horse, it's a very different ball game to the horse by itself. But back to this lateral movement and the shoulders moving and the haunches moving. The reason I sort of go on about that is the great trainer Nuno Oliveira, Portuguese 20th century guy who sort of synthesized all the dressage approaches into something very rational, said that the shoulder in, which is effectively when the hindquarters go out, because it brings the shoulders to the inside and they cross that inside honey. It's the alpha and omega of horse training. And it's the aspirin. He always said it's the aspirin of horse training. It,
Yeah.
it seems to solve every problem. And I have definitely found that borne out, that for some reason, that particular movement seems to bring both physical and mental, emotional balance, equilibrium to a horse at the same moment, whether it's shoulders in or counter shoulders in. Both of them seem to work. And of course, what you described with take the shoulders away, that's kind of counter shoulders in, or shoulders out, as people call it, and take the butt to the outside, that becomes shoulders in. So it's just interesting how these things seem to create equilibrium, mental, physical, emotional, in horses. They do it in nature. When we do it with them, it seems to work. I'm going to ask you to talk a bit more about the kind of some of the crazy trust things you ended up doing with those horses in a minute, which I think puts it in context for listeners. But do you feel, just while we're on this subject, that people who are in the equine assisted world, most of us are getting donation horses in, right? They come with the stories they come with. And to some degree, we always restart them because it's a different job.
Yeah.
These essential movements, do you feel that they're actually kind of crucial to the job in some way? And can
Yeah.
you just talk a little bit about why that is? Because I think for newcomers to the field, that is useful information.
Yeah. I mean, I think for one, because of just the gymnastic value of it, because you
Mm.
want to keep your horses healthy and sound, especially if you take it into the more classical and handwork, then where you can build it up to collection and, you can build the top line like that without putting a lot of strain on them. Because sometimes, especially in therapeutic places, you might get older horses, you might get horses with
Mm. Coming
niggles,
in with
but
injuries. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but also from just a connecting with the horse, also safety point of view, I find, because if you can reliably do those exercises on the ground, if you ever get in trouble, you have something to work with, you have something to go to. Meaning, say if you're with a horse and you have a client on your horse. I mean, we all hope that's never going to happen, but there are horses you cannot guarantee that it's never going to happen. But if you have that established, say the horse gets a fright from something behind him, and you can just say, go into your shoulder in positioning, or go into your soft bend where you do your counter shouldering, or if that is really solid, that can often get you out of trouble. It has gotten me out of trouble when, say, with young horses, or with more difficult is often horses who have had bad experiences, when you can make, you can misjudge a situation and get into a position where the horse maybe has a strong reaction to something that you weren't anticipating. But when you have these exercises, just from a safety point of view, you can keep yourself and the horse very safe, actually, because when they get, especially into that shoulder in position, you are out of range of hind legs off, also because the hindquarters are moving away from you. They're not, they're not going to
And the
hit.
shoulders are not moving. Interestingly, even though the shoulders come in, they move around you. So you're not likely to get body slammed.
Yeah, also you
Yeah.
still want that bend there, right? So that means they're not walking the shoulder on top of you.
Exactly.
If you've established that. And so, yeah, I have definitely been in situations where I was very grateful that we had those tools, even though, as I say, you try to prepare so that it doesn't happen, that you need to kind of really get yourself out of trouble. But it does happen. And yeah, I've just felt if you can get a horse into that shoulder in position, and they have learned that, oh, usually when I get to the position, then I soften my body and then that feels really good. They can learn to work through that emotion almost in that situation, and you allow them to move. You're not saying to them, you can't move. You're just saying, move like this.
Right. I think I just want to pick up on what you just said there. The allowing them to work through the situation. That, of course, is the process of resilience, isn't it?
Yeah.
The saying, okay, here I am in a freak out. Here's a tool that leads me through the freak out. On the other side of that freak out is resilience. And then you have a horse that's maturing emotionally, that also finds that growth and that fulfillment in growth. Because I think one often forgets that horses have that need just as much as humans do. So do
Yeah.
dogs, so do all intelligent mammals, right? Boredom is a real problem. So it's interesting that these tools, which have clearly been used universally since like the Bronze Age, are still not necessarily universally adopted. Because, when I was a kid, they weren't really part of the conversation
Yeah.
of young
Yeah.
horse starting. They weren't really, it's interesting that now, of course, they are becoming more mainstream, but even within the therapy world, I think we don't see them being used as systematically as they could be for rehabbing, for maintaining, because it's also like a yoga. If you're an older horse, it keeps you supple, it keeps you feeling good, and keeps the brain active. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the somewhat extreme situations you then got with trust? I mean, I know in front of these big crowds, that some of the stuff you were doing with Will at those big breed shows. Just give us an idea about how far that work could go, because I think that gives us some insights.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so
Great
Will
story.
he had the brilliant idea that you take a sensitive, sharp warm blood, and then you put very big plastic tarps in a big indoor arena, and you put
Like you do.
you put wooden sticks on all the corners, and then you have a person in each corner, and then these people can create nice big waves with the plastic tarps. And
Why not?
but well, it was to him because at that time he was building his business around being able to help horses who were reactive or who had problems with feeling safe and functioning in the human world. So he was taking it to an extreme to showcase that you can help them feel safe enough with things that they can, you know, do all these. Because you'd get it to a point where we'd bring this tarp up behind them in this big wave and it would land on their back. And
Okay.
he would get them, well, because eventually we would cover the horse, so it'd have to land on the back first. And he would get it to a point where the moment that tarp came down on the horse's back, the horse would be like, huh, because they knew that that
Okay.
was the moment of release and reward. That was good. That was
Okay.
the tarp became the safe zone, which means that because
Okay.
they also, when they go out, they have to deal with the crowd as well and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
did prepare them for that, but it's very difficult to prepare them for that kind of atmosphere. But in a
Mm,
funny way, that I think that for a lot of them, then the big tarps helped because they were like, oh, this thing I know, this thing I'm safe in, I know exactly what happens.
mm, mm,
And I would say it actually, in some way, might have helped some of them cope with everything else that was going on because it was a
mm.
clear task, a clear thing to engage with that they were familiar with. But I mean, getting them there was not always straightforward. I mean, also Will has a knack for not choosing the easiest horses to deal with. I sometimes say we should have filmed like the first time he introduced them to the top and then the result because, but also again, it was about, he figured out a system of breaking it down. You know, you'd
Mm,
start with a smaller top, obviously.
mm,
You could, in the beginning, just fold it together so they just had to step across. They didn't even have to step
mm,
on it. Then you fold it out, you make it gradually bigger. Then you move
mm,
to the big one. In the beginning, they just walk on it. Then you
yeah.
get people on the corners to just wave it a little bit.
Mm,
But you can be strategic, meaning you can wave it, and then as the horse comes towards it, you stop waving it. So
mm,
the horse always feels, oh, when I go towards it, it goes away.
mm.
And you just gradually build it. It's really, it's like with all horse training, it's about seeing how you can break it down to make it achievable and to explain it step by step.
One of the things which we use, this in Horseboy a lot is effectively bomb proofing. We've done it for a while because our horses are now so solid, but we used to do a ton with tarps. And I'm just sort of remembering we did exactly, I used to feed the horses on the tarps
Yeah.
and then have people, exactly as you say, sort of crinkle them, make little waves out of them. And then eventually it would get to a point where we could wrap a horse in a tarp while he
Hmm.
was eating. And he would be like, they'd hear the crinkle of the tarp and they'd just come running. And also the training of tricks. I remember, a horse that came in, he became one of the most solid horseboy horses we ever had, but he was a wild caught Mustang. And I just took him off the hands of one of my son's ex-babysitters just because she couldn't deal with him. And he really couldn't be dealt with at all. And he'd just get up on his hind legs and box at you. What am I going to do with this horse? Why did I get this horse? And then that was one of the first horses that Ileana and I ever collaborated on.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I thought, well, we can't get on him because he just stands on his hind legs. So I taught him to bow. And then I would just get on him when he bowed. And then it's
Yeah.
funny, then he'd get up, he'd be like, oh, well, yeah, you know. And then with the hind leg stuff, I remember thinking, well, okay, you're there. I don't want to stop you from being, I want to fight with you. Why don't we do stuff while you're there? And for me, that was all quite new. So I just started doing all kinds of hind leg tricks with him. And
Yeah.
then after a while, it's like, well, this is kind of work, maybe I'm losing my motivation to use this as an evasion. And then he didn't much fancy trailers, which wasn't surprising because he probably had a terrible time with them when he was caught. So I remember teaching him Spanish walk on a ramp and so that he could get a treat when his feet made a certain sound on the ramp. And then you could Spanish walk him into trailers when you couldn't
Yeah.
lead him. And what was interesting for all of that with me was that it was a way of sort of thinking around problems and thinking, well, this is
Yeah.
where the behavior is. How do I go with it, not against it? How do I avoid a fight? And what we often found was that horses that seemed not good prospects, interestingly, became very good professionals because somehow we engaged that curiosity. So I then started a little bit of work with a guy called Alan Pogue, who listeners and viewers should check out. Alan Pogue, imagineahorse.com. He's a master trick trainer. And I realized that trick training was just such a great thing because it crossed the line with bomb proofing. It constantly took the horses into these new situations. It engaged their curiosity. It engaged perhaps parts of the body they wouldn't normally be using, like picking up a pair of socks and handing it to you or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, a horse that's a bit mouthy suddenly gets something to do with their mouth. And then
Yeah.
that stops being a problem because you give it something else to do and blah, 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 blah. And it made me do a sort of complete rethink, which I think really helped me, not just oddly enough with the preparation of horses, but with how I would then relate to behaviors in the kids. Because I would then say, oh, okay, you're here, your teacher and your family naturally want you there, but here is where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we meet you where you are and find what's kind of cool about endlessly splashing or spinning or
Yeah.
spitting
Yeah.
or
Yeah. I think it's a
chucking.
bit
And then,
about seeing possibilities rather than problems, right? I think that's what
yeah,
you're describing.
yeah.
That.
Okay, so you're there, you're presenting these sharp warm bloods at breed shows in front of tens of thousands of people, flapping huge tarpaulins all over
Yeah.
the place, and the
I
horses
was
like,
a professional top handler.
and this is, as you say, sort of top tier industry stuff. What makes you then want to shift towards the therapeutic line? Like how does your curiosity take you that way?
Yeah.
Or were you
I mean,
always curious about it?
no, I don't think I always was. I was a bit with the horses. I was also always interested in helping horses feel better, whether that be physically or mentally or, yeah, in whichever way. But I think the interest in therapeutic work with humans also came through my own. I kind of got through, I had another bout of bad anxiety when I was working at Wills. And I think caused by, there is a lot of pressure
In that world?
to produce a good job just by being in that industry.
Yeah.
And there's often a conflict, especially when you're training horses for clients, between wanting to be doing right by the horse
Mhm.
and at the same time meeting the client's expectations of where the horse should be after a certain amount of time,
Mhm.
that I found really difficult
Mhm.
to deal with. And then I think I really got into, and I don't really know how or why, but a thing that I think is also happening a lot still today, where you feel that the desired state for yourself and the horse is calm. You know that it has to be calm, that no one can react to anything. No one can have a reaction. Nothing can ever happen that is a bit out of line. And naturally, in that line of work, always something happens, it's just part of it. But at that time, I remember feeling that if a horse had a spook at something, or which, they're horses, they will spook. Or if, say, a young horse had an initial negative reaction to the saddle or whatever, that I would feel that I had failed so massively and that somehow it wasn't all right. So I think those things combined, and we can get back to how I view that now, or I can tell you now how I view that now.
Mm.
But I got into a spiral of being anxious. But I also think, again, that there was a certain growth I wanted, and I wasn't taking the steps to go towards that growth. And I know that for me, my body, my system, everything then starts speaking up and saying, hello, are you going to do something? And then if I don't, it throws worse stuff
Yeah.
at me. But yeah, I got to a point where I stopped actively training horses. I would almost like get dizzy if I got on a horse. I had huge trouble driving in a car. And I don't think it's a car. I think it's that fear of doing something wrong or failing or letting myself down. That was
Mm.
going on massively. And yeah, I think just living through that and looking for solutions for that, I got into, I sought out healing for myself naturally, and going through that process really, yeah, ignited some desire in me to pay that forward and, you know, help people. And also, again, chase that growth that comes
Yeah.
with engaging with those things.
It's very interesting what you said about calm. Let's go with that. And then before we go on with your story, I've noticed this too. And this has become, I say, more and more a conversation in the last 5 years. I've noticed, maybe it's since COVID, this idea that if you're triggered away from calmness, it's like a disaster.
Yeah.
And there's always been a part of me that, well, not part of me, a large, maybe all of me that says, no, 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 hold on. Triggering is what you're on planet Earth for. I mean, we're hunter gatherers. We face elephants. We face lions. We face droughts. We face pandemics. We face floods. We face strong nature. And also in the, shamanic traditions of the indigenous peoples that I've been lucky enough to spend time with, that kind of high emotional and physical drama plays out in the healing practices as well. But the calm is what comes on the other side of it. But you don't try to defend the calm because you are supposed to react appropriately when there is a threat.
Yeah.
So that when there's a threat, you don't freak out and get killed. And, it's so interesting. One really good example of that would be, I was walking once with a man called Jumanda Fakdeboni, who was a bushman who I was very close to. But a really interesting man because he also could fully function in the Western world and was also a human rights advocate and so on. But he'd really grown up in the bush. And we were walking one day in the central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is a very, very wild area of Botswana. We ran into two big male lions.
Yeah.
He got up and were like, "Who are you?" And there's no way we could have run to a tree. And I'm like, "All right, Jumanda, what do we do now?" And he's like, "Rupert, the lions are our cousins. I will show you. We will walk with them." And he had this whole way of addressing them. And we walked parallel with them and they walked parallel with us while he talked to them and engaged with them in a way that he'd been taught to do.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, they sort of probably got bored with us and walked away. And afterwards, I said to him, "Weren't you scared?" Because I certainly was. I need to
Yeah.
change my trousers now. And he says, "Rupert, we walk with fear, but fear does not override.
Yeah.
Fear simply informs, but you know when you must react to fight or flight, but it's not very often. And
Hmm.
so therefore, when you walk through the bush with a bushman where there's just constantly stuff out there that is thinking about eating you, you never get eaten because all their reactions are appropriate, because they don't have an expectation that fear should not be, or anxiety should not be part of the equation,
Yeah.
but that it also it doesn't negatively affect your quality of life because you simply get good at it.
Yeah.
So you're aware, not freaked out. And he showed me some really interesting things to do. And I think horse people actually have a predisposition for this because obviously when you're up on a horse, you're constantly in danger. And at a certain point, we just kind of get okay with that, and where we can be scanning for, should we be reacting more or less to something, but we're always aware. We know that if you let your guard down completely, that's when you end up on the floor. So I think we do have a predisposition for this. But he showed me some really interesting exercises. Like he said, always listen to your gut. If there is, you can try these as experiments with dangerous animals and see where your safety is and where your safety isn't. So I probably did something a bit silly, but I used to go for little walks at night in Texas barefoot. knowing where there were snakes down there.
Yeah.
And I would take a very short way and just feel in my body snake. And he said, if you ever feel that, Rupert, it's there.
Yeah.
And then he said, make friends with it. And then ask yourself, do I retreat? Do I go round? Do I stop? Do I go forward? And I played with that a little bit. And 2 times, I think it really saved my life. One time I did something very stupid, wandered away from the fire, thinking I knew my way to my tent. So I'd camped there before. And the guys at the bushmen at the fire said, shall we walk you to your tent? And I'm like, no. And of course, I totally got lost with him because these thickets, the Kalahari's a thicket.
Yeah.
And there's no landmarks, and so you get lost very fast. And I blundered straight into a big herd of elephant. And if you walk into them physically, they'll kill you. They'll walk you with the trunk. So I just went into that thing of, after I beat myself up for being so stupid, what do I need to do here? Making contact with them, and the answer was make yourself small, sit on the ground, and say that you are no threat, and wait. So I did that. And I was surrounded for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, they moved off. And I was like, another time I was walking towards a camp and I heard the banging and shouting and banging of pots. And that's often what people do when there's a snake, a bad snake, and they want to scare it away. And walking towards that noise, thinking, I wonder if I should be walking towards that noise. This huge black mamba, about 10 foot long, which is the only really aggressive poisonous snake there.
Yeah.
And if it bites you, kind of that's it. Comes shooting up the trail towards me. And I like, what do I say? It's don't run. Be a tree. And I was like, I'm a tree, and I'm a tree. I'm not a warm-blooded thing. And the thing went over my foot.
Oh.
And, later, after, 10 diaper changes later, I was very grateful for what Jumanda had said. But I think horses had taught me a lot of that earlier. This thing about everything's supposed to be calm, you're never supposed to be triggered. Does this actually serve us? Is this actually weakening us, not strengthening us? You've been treading this path with anxiety, quite heavy anxiety, looking for solutions. What are your thoughts?
I don't think it serves us at all, because it's not our natural state. And as you say, we are supposed to be in different nervous system states.
Right. Heart rate
And
variability, basically, right? Up and down.
And also, though, we are supposed to be able to, as you say, walk with fear, because what I feel is now, just because I feel anxious about something doesn't mean I can't do it, and doesn't necessarily mean I shouldn't do it. But that's where the gut feeling also comes in, because I use that too, because there's fear that is there to keep you from doing the thing that will harm you.
Right.
And there's fear, especially in modern society, there's fear that is just loopy thoughts and stories that are not actually true. And I guess my gut feeling is what helps me discern between them, because often there's lots of things where I feel that I like to do, that I want to do. So I love traveling. When I lived in Ireland, I went for quite a few road trips and stuff. Every morning when I was about to go for that road trip that I had planned and that I was really looking forward to, I would be so scared. And I'd feel like, no, I'm just going to stay in bed. But then by that time, I know myself well enough to go, that's fine. You just move. That's what helps me, because I know that there's...
Like the horse, move your feet.
You move. So I have to just physically, I say, put my feet on the ground. I get up. I walk over here. And that's the thing, to not get frozen.
Get frozen. Interesting.
But you have to, in that situation, that's the hard thing. The hard thing is to learn to move with that fear, because we've been taught in some ways that when you feel that fear, that means you shouldn't do the thing. But that's not always true. That's not always true.
No, it's frequently not true. I mean,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to, jumping horses. As you know, when you're on a horse going into a jump, there's that moment of commitment
Hmm.
where you have up until a certain point where you can say, it's a bad idea, I'm going to pull out.
Yeah.
And then there's a certain point where it's a very bad idea to do that.
Yeah.
And that would probably result in an injury more so than if you took a fall.
Mhm.
So there are times when you jump and you realize at the moment of commitment that it's perhaps not going to be good, but then you can hopefully not resist the fall, tumble, bounce, and hop up rather than resist it, land harder.
Yeah.
Or that last moment of commitment as the horse is giving that great rush into the air, try to oppose it and end up bringing your horse down or whatever.
Yeah. I would also
So,
say
yeah,
actually the most trouble I've gotten in when riding or whatever is when something has happened, but it wasn't necessarily the thing happening that was the problem, but it was me resisting the horse doing what they were doing. So rather than
yes,
following the horse through what they were going through, I would
yeah,
resist it and try to, jam up on it. And that's where then you make it worse doing that. Also, I want to actually bring this back to the horses briefly because I was saying I was feeling like they couldn't have a reaction, and we talked about this yesterday,
mm,
where I now feel that I'd a horse is going to spook, a horse is going to react to things, and that in itself is not a problem, and that the moment that determines whether you're going to be right or not is when they meet, because often when you're with them, they will meet your aids in some way. They will meet, if you're
mm,
walking them, they'll meet the halter, or they'll meet the rein, or they'll meet, if you sit on them, maybe your leg that closes up around them for you to stay on and balance. And that's again the thing where if they see you as a threat, then that's where you get in trouble. But if they see you as helpful when they meet your aids, then you can come back in harmony. So I feel now it's not about being calm all the time. It's like, can we keep our connection? And that's whether that's your connection with the horse or whether that's a connection with yourself. Can I keep that connection through whatever's going on, through the triggering thing or the reaction or
yeah,
what it is. I think that is the thing I've more moved towards, because then you can go through all kinds of situations, all kinds of states, and yeah, still be all right. And it's part of
yeah.
life.
I'm thinking about also having a larger repertoire of aids so, when I was younger, there was no in-hand work, for example.
Yeah.
So when one was faced with, say, the horse, what they would call in England, napping, I don't want to go forward. And I'm going to either I am afraid of the rubbish bins or I'm going to pretend I'm afraid of the rubbish bins. But whatever it is, I'm bracing here and I'm not going forward. And
Hmm.
the only tool we were given was to try and use force. And sometimes it would quote unquote work, but that behavior would never really go away.
Yeah.
Or it wouldn't work. And in the not working, it could sometimes result in you or the horse getting hurt. And the prevailing wisdom at the time was if you got off the horse had won.
Yeah. You would have
And
failed.
which was so interesting to me because there was this little part of me even back then thinking, yeah, but horses don't think like us, right? I mean, they don't sit there at night planning how to mess us up like a
Yeah.
human might. It's not they don't have strategies, but I don't know if they have that strategy. They're more in the moment, right? So surely if I get off and lead the horse around through somehow in that situation, reassure him, isn't that a win? But I was saying, no,
Yeah.
no, it's not, Rupert. You've got to, and you'd have people really barking at you, make him do it. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
Sometimes 3 or 4 people like that at a
Mhm.
time. Now I know with, lovely in hand work, back to, again, what you were talking about, moving the shoulders away, moving the haunches away, shoulder in, whatever we're going to call it, shoulders out. My first reaction is dismount and change the subject. Good idea. Let's stay here and do these in hand. And let's
Mhm.
gradually move closer in these in hand patterns to Mr. Rubbishbin. And then, oh, hello, Mr. Rubbishbin. This is my friend, Mr. Horse. And we're pleased to meet you. And, would you like to exchange WhatsApp numbers and maybe
Yeah.
chat about your mutual anxiety? And, pretty soon we're just doing our patterns around the thing or something. But there's as you say, there's a range of tools and a range of aids where the aids can be reassuring rather than meeting your leg to kick or meeting the stick
Yeah.
to drive forward. The stick can then be just, oh, well, let's play with these in hand things just to teach you how to have the stick on your shoulder to stop and how
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
have a,
And also, again, it softens the body, and we always know the mind and the body, they work together so much.
Mm.
And it gives them something to do and somewhere, when they tense up, that energy goes into the body and then it gives them somewhere to move
right.
that energy. Yeah.
And if you
And I do
yourself
think,
are scared, and tensing, then to dismount is to make yourself safe or
yeah,
safer, right? Surely that's a good
absolutely.
idea, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And I think at the end of the day, a horse cares about whether they feel good around you, whether they feel safe with you, whether you make sense, whether you're
mm,
helpful. They do not care whether you dismounted or not, you know? They just know, oh, I was in this situation, I got worried, and then I worked with my human and I was okay. That is the
nicely
takeaway
put,
we'd like them to have, you know? It
nicely put.
also,
Yeah.
when I work with horses in workshops, I always say, because sometimes you want to show a lot and stuff, but I always say to the audience, look, what I want to get to with this horse is that if I approached them tomorrow and said, would you like to come out and play with me again? That they say, yes, I would. So giving them that experience, right?
Are
And
you
ultimately that,
someone that they want to hang out with? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And ultimately that's the same when working with people, right? That's the feeling we want to give. Say if it's a child with autism or whatever, if I'm working with them, it's
Right.
the same. I want to, at the end of the session, feel that when they come again the next time and they get out of the car and they see me there, that they think, cool, I want to do this thing and I'm
Yeah.
going to be all right here. Yeah.
And it's true that the safety thing is the first prerequisite, but the fun and curiosity makes one want to return. But of course, fun and curiosity will lead us into situations where we no longer feel quite so safe. But if we, let's say, I'm just thinking like a standard horseboy play date where the kid wants to dismount and go in the creek.
Hmm.
And then suddenly he's in the creek, wants to go in the creek. We make sure it's safe. We're obviously not going to let them go in the creek unless we're not even going to be near the creek unless we know the creek is
Yeah.
safe. But nonetheless, it's a new situation. Am I safe? Am I not? And now we have to go through another series of things. But because I feel a base safety if I'm the kid, I feel, okay, I could explore here
Yeah.
and now deal with my soft, am I safe again trigger to now
Yeah.
learn what do
Yeah.
I do with water?
But like ultimately,
Yeah.
you want that safety. You don't want it to be like, I am
Immobilized.
safe and coddled in every situation. You want it to be that even when I go out and explore with my curiosity, even if maybe I do have a meltdown, I am still safe. That emotional safety is still there. You know what I mean?
My
And I think that's,
people will see me right. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that's also with the horses the same thing. I want to feel that the horse knows, even if I make a mistake or if my human makes a mistake, that we are still going to be okay. Like the bottom line is we're okay, but within that container, a lot can happen that's not calm.
Yes.
It's again that conversation.
Right. And the acts of God, I mean, the things that you just can't see coming. I'm thinking about a particular situation I had where we were in a part of England where there are army training grounds in the vicinity. And we
Yeah,
were with a young horse, and what were the odds? 2 huge military helicopters came up over the ridge of an area that we were used to working a lot. Never seen anything like that before. And it had to happen right there and right then. We have no control over it. And the fact is, that's what life does. So are our tools then going to bring us, like when we meet those lions with Jamanda, we meet those helicopters, is there enough learned resilience to think, even though that's happening, I can be optimistic about the outcome?
Yeah.
And yeah, the horses leapt around a little bit, but because we were ourselves not panicking and okay, we could go through the disruption back to calm. Because it's not that we don't want calm as well. It's just more, I suppose, to my mind, the dance of life feels like, and the dance of life is what we're talking about here, isn't it? Whether it's with horses or people or both. When one's a toddler and one is learning to walk, that's why they call it toddling. We face plant a lot, but it doesn't stop us. Each face plant does not stop us from toddling more, because we know we need to toddle. And eventually we know we need to run, dance, climb, and do the whole thing. So the face plants are okay. But we hope that mum and dad don't say, you stupid little, and they kick you when you fall down. We hope that mum and dad give you support, lift you up, dust you down, give you a kiss and a hug, and help you along your way again. And so, of course, then you see somebody who knows how to walk, and it appears that they are constantly in balance, and they're not. What they're doing is they're giving away balance and retrieving balance and giving away balance and retrieving balance, but they're now just efficient at it. However, if there's one little paving stone that is even 1/4 of an inch higher than the other one, because of the commitment to weight that one has to make, the commitment to the loss of balance one still has to make in any given footfall walking, we will face plant. And once in a while we will. But we learned from way back in toddlerdom that even though you can pretty seriously hurt yourself with a face plant, land on your elbow or something, you could break your nose, you could do lots of things, but you probably won't, and you'll probably mostly just have bruised pride.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop you walking, right?
It's not going to stop you, because if it stopped you walking, then you could say, well, I'm never going to leave my house.
Yeah.
That's going to be a greater set of problems. When you then encountered this slightly immobilizing anxiety, despite having learned resilience with the family situation with your dad, despite having, gone to Tanzania as a teenager and done that thing, despite all of this work with high level work with the horses, I think this is really interesting, because it can creep up on one, these little nervous breakdowns, where you're like, you're grand, and whump. There must have been a part of you that was like, hold on a second, I'm the person that went to Tanzania at 16. I'm the person that can go under tarpaulins in front of big crowds with sharp warmbloods and be okay. But what is going on here?
Yeah.
And why are my tools not working? Can you just give us a little insight into that? Because I think a lot of people that are coming as clients in the equine assisted, particularly as adults, are dealing with exactly that. It's like, hold on a second, I've been going through life. Then there's another group who are sort of adolescents, who I think are less perhaps resilient today than they have been in previous generations. So we could go into maybe why that might be, saying, I don't seem to be able to mobilize at all.
If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com, check out the free introduction course, take it from there.
Talk to us about that. How did you deal with that process of, but I know how to walk. Why do I feel I can't walk? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Initially, that was actually something that made it worse, I'd say, because I was
Yeah.
beating myself up very badly. And you can get to feeling that there's something so seriously wrong with you. I was like, why am I this messed up? You know, and I just felt that I was in some ways beyond repair, you know, which is not true, but it was there. And I think it's just important to say that can be the state that you find someone in, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess what helped me is I started actively seeking help
Yeah.
from other humans. I was like, because I think from the situation that had happened with my dad, I had built a bit of a belief that I had to be able to do it myself.
Mm.
And of course, we're not designed to do
No, we're
everything
tribal
alone.
people. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I found Jane Pike, brilliant Jane Pike, who is an expert in nervous system work and supports especially horse people, but all kinds of people now, also does a lot of creative work.
And again, for listeners and viewers, there's a very, very good interview we did with Jane Pike on our other podcast, Live Free, Ride Free. Go have a listen to her because she is very good on this subject. Yeah.
Yeah. And from her, I got lots of knowledge about what was going on for me and why I was feeling the way I was from a nervous system perspective.
Mm.
But I think what helped me even more was that she's got this in her program. When you're in your program, you get into a Facebook group. And in there, I started reading the conversations that were going on in there, and then eventually started putting questions in myself or just things I was struggling with. And I found, even though it was just an online community, the fact that people were not shaming me for it, they were not saying there was anything wrong with me. Everyone was kind, helpful, uplifting. There was also a lot of banter, joking, joy. You
Mm.
know, there was also a seeking of joy, which I hadn't really considered.
And humor is perspective, isn't it? When you have humor, you
Yeah.
see a situation from the outside. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because Jane also, she has a brilliant sense of humor also.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
So, and the lightheartedness, even though you talk about very serious topics sometimes. And
Mm.
I think that for me was the first step to getting better, to realizing, okay, I do need community for this. And then I guess I gradually started, actually, it was before that even, I went to kind of a shamanic healing intensive for 2 weeks. That was a
Mm.
bit of a really cry for help. I was like, I don't know what to do anymore. So I'll just go away and work with shamans for 2 weeks because I
Yeah, and
felt,
that's kind of back to you say about you moving your feet. I think that the sacred journey, pilgrimage, this is as old as humanity as well.
yeah,
This idea is I will physically, not just mentally, get off my butt and go and seek. Because we're
yeah.
hunter gatherers, right? I will
Mm-hmm.
go and seek
Mm-hmm.
a solution. This is something I think is not often really talked about
Yeah.
how vital that physical movement towards a solution
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Because I
and of
think
itself. Yeah.
there was always a spark of, I want to feel different to what I'm feeling now.
Mm.
And I guess there must have been some belief that I could feel different if I just moved enough in some ways, you know?
Mm.
So, and then I think it just, those two things combined got me starting to look into chasing joy more and things that gave me a sense of aliveness. Because it can be such a paradox that you feel so anxious and at the same time you feel a bit dead inside.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotion and a lot of activity in your body, and at the same time you do not feel
There's a sort of
properly
stagnation.
alive. Yeah. And that can be a hard one to sit with, because often you feel, oh, but I'm tired from all this stuff moving in my body. And then you feel I don't have the energy to go out and do this thing that will
Yes.
bring me joy. But
Yes.
in that situation, I would say it's crucial that you move and do that thing that brings you joy, because that's what's going to give you the energy. It's,
Yeah, and of course, what's the first sign of depression? It's lack of physical movement usually.
yeah.
And what's interesting too is you said you found that Facebook group with Jane's program, because as you know, Facebook can be all sorts of trickiness,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
one can on social media find all kinds of reasons to not move, to wallow, to go deeper. In fact, if you put those sorts of posts out, you really dive into the poor me, you'll get so much positive feedback on that that it
Hmm.
will actually feed quite a lot of dopamine within one's brain to say, oh, well, if I really concentrate on my suffering here and effectively celebrate that, I'm going to get a lot of positive feedback. So this validates me, so I'll keep doing that. But of course, all
Yeah.
that's going to mean is that I
Yeah.
just stay where I am. And of course, we know that this is one of the issues of social media, I think, particularly with the younger generation, because it's definitely something which is an unavoidable conversation right now, which is that why is your average late adolescent, early adult person today seemingly so much less resilient
Hmm.
than
I
in the
would
previous
posit
generation? Yeah.
that maybe COVID has something to do with it as well, because there was a time frame where we were constantly being fed that other people are dangerous,
Ooh.
because the way, there was kind of lockdown and all the things,
Yeah.
and you weren't allowed within a
Yeah.
certain space of other people. You always had to have, what is it, 1.5 meters distance or whatever. So
Mm.
subconsciously, you're starting to tell your body you have to fear other human beings. That it's
Right.
not safe to be close to other human beings.
When,
And
of
I
course, the
think
mammalian caregiving system is all about proximity.
I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
has really rattled the nervous system of all of us in a way, because
But especially the ones who were kids during that time.
yeah,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
we already in modern society lack that feeling of community so often, lack that tribe. That's also where we're talking about, yeah, you have to move and you have to do all those things. But in saying that, I also do realize that that is so much harder when you do not feel that you have a community who supports you.
Mm,
So
mm,
for me,
mm.
that was really the first step to being able to actually move, that I felt I had some sort of community, even that I felt safely held within unconditionally. And that many people like, and I do think that that got worse during COVID, because the way we were moving around the world and the information we were being fed all the time was just wiring us to think, yeah, as I said, that we have to fear in some way other people and being close to
Mm.
other
I
humans.
think there's a lot of truth in that. It's so okay. Let's just go on a little bit with your bio, but there's some other things I'd like to talk to around these subjects. But I think if we go forward in your story, I think it will help. So you
Hmm.
then end up working in Ireland at
Yes.
Stewart's Care, which is a large organisation that does art methods, it does horseboy, it does movement method, it does tackine, but it also does other things too. And it's not there's an equine unit, but it's
Hmm.
obviously a much bigger organisation than just the equine.
Yes.
Talk to us about your experience there, how your experience up until that point helped and informed your therapeutic practice
Hmm.
there. And then, yeah, give us some situations with clients and horses, because you also were responsible for helping from the ground up prepare all the horses for
Yeah.
this organization as well, because it had to happen in a hurry.
Yeah.
They got the green light and suddenly, okay, we need all these horses and we need get moving and we need to get serving. And suddenly you were in there getting all these horses together. And then boom, you're in serving not a small client base, but an almost overwhelming tsunami client base. Once
Yeah.
again, Kira style, you go in at the deep end. So yeah, talk us through that. Tell us about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that they had already, by the time I got there, done a really good job with the horses that
Yeah.
were there.
And Kez, our
Kez
mutual
was
friend
there.
Kez Sullivan, had been a big part of
Exactly.
that.
She had
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
done a lot. So
Note to viewers and listeners, go back to the Kez Sullivan and Anne Hemingway podcast that we did a year or two ago. Very, very good people. You need to. Okay. So
yeah,
Kez
brilliant.
Kez and Terry had been.
Exactly. They
Yeah,
had been doing a lot already. And then of course, again, it was an interesting task, but I especially enjoyed working with so many clients because it was the first time for me being really exposed to that. And funnily enough, I found that the skills I'd gotten from working with very sensitive horses really helped, because it is so much, especially when you're dealing with non-verbal clients, becomes about reading the body language, the state they're in, and responding to that in a way that signals to them that you hear them and that you are a safe person for them. Because you're trying to, even though like we would have half an hour with each client only, but you're trying to build relationship also, because we know that in order for them to really get the benefit of the session and to learn, they need to feel safe enough, because when their amygdala gets too triggered, they will not be able to learn. I mean, that's a whole neuroscience behind horseboy, right? So, but I also learned a lot from these kids, I feel. And I feel that sometimes they view the world in such wondrous ways that in a lot of ways helped me with my own stuff.
Can you give us a
Because
couple of examples?
there's one, what a beautiful example I felt was I was out with a girl, and we were chatting, and she was active, and she started blowing kisses to the environment. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. Are you blowing kisses to the air? And she's like, oh, I'm blowing kisses to the grass. I was like, oh, that's nice. Why are you doing that? And then she told me how her grandpa had passed away. She said, well, yeah, my grandpa passed away, but now that means he's everywhere. He's in everything. So when I blow kisses to the grass, I also blow kisses to my grandpa. And I was like, you got it, kid, we should be listening to you, because that can sometimes, you can have parents come in and say, she lives in her fantasy world a lot, or can you bring her more into reality? When in some ways I felt with things like that, she was closer to reality than many of us maybe are.
Yeah, she should have been the therapist in that situation.
Yeah. Actually, another interesting one I had, this is a lot about kind of how expectations also can shape things and how helpful joy is, because there was a boy who came with a school, and we'd get so many kids, and especially when they came with a school, you wouldn't know who you were paired up with. You often didn't really know much about the child at that time that you were meeting. We'd have a general plan, and of course there were teachers present and there were assistants present, but this boy, he was just really keen and he was positive, and I had a pony ready, so I just got him up on the pony and we just started chatting, and I could tell he liked a lot of movement and stuff. So I got him trotting right away, and we did funny things, and it was very playful and joyful, and he was just talking to me the whole time. And then when we were done with the sessions, the teachers were like, yeah, he doesn't talk to strangers usually. And to me, in that situation, I was kind of grateful I didn't know that before, because I didn't treat him in any like different way to a kid. You feel out where the kid is, but I might not have clocked onto that he was open and ready to have fun if I would have thought, oh, he doesn't like strangers. I have to be really careful, because that could have been told to me by the people around him, but that's not what he was telling me. And I think that's a thing that can happen with people, but also with horses, that we have to be careful not to project a story or limitations onto them, allow them to tell us where they are at, and equally allow them to tell us when they're not ready for something. You know, you might also have a situation the other way around where people tell you, oh, but he's fine with that. But the kid is clearly telling you they're not fine with that in this particular situation. So I guess it taught me, for one, really to listen to the person, be that a person in horse shape, a person in human shape, really to listen to the person in front of me and allow them to say yes and no to things. Because if you offer something, should we do this, and you pause, you will often be able to see, are they into it or not? You know, most of the time you'll get some indication. And at the same time, it also taught me that thing of how important joy and play is. And because often if you could make things funny, if it was engaging, if it was humorous, everything became so much easier. And that's actually something I've also taken on from you as a horse trainer, because when I see you work with horses, I'm going to inflate your ego a little bit here now, there's always a sense of humor about it. So if the horse does something, you see the brilliance in it and maybe how it was funny, or it's not made into a bigger deal than what it was. And I think nowadays we humans can often get into doing the opposite, you know, taking a little thing and being like, "Oh, but that was not what I wanted and that was wrong." And then you're in this negative spiral rather than saying, that's kind of funny and that was quite a creative response I got there. And what are the possibilities with this? And or how do I need to adjust to move closer to where I want to go?
The listening thing is really, thank you for the compliment. The listening thing is, to me, the key. I think that my son uncompromisingly trained by being non-verbal, that there was no option
Yeah.
but to train oneself into different ways of listening. Listen with the body, listen, and I can think back to the training with the Bushman that I went through. That was the same,
Mhm.
really.
Mhm. Even again, listen with your gut, right? Sometimes you get a gut
Correct.
feeling about, yeah.
And sometimes when there's a negative reaction isn't always a refusal. Like a negative reaction is like a brace in a human or a horse, I often find, is not necessarily a refusal or a rejection. It is sometimes or frequently a, I don't know yet. And in this moment, I need to pause because I need to sort of find out, my brain needs to know if I'm safe or not. And in my early horse training or horse life, you didn't wait for horses when they braced.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious to just pause and wait
Mhm.
and say, take a moment, you
Mhm.
know. And by the way, if you do want to retreat from this thing, that's also okay. You've
Yeah.
got choice, got agency here. But here we are. So, and we're both curious. So we might go and have a look at it, but by all means, take some time. And then, of course, in the school of human upbringing that I was brought up with, impatience was
Right.
just, impatience backed up with corporal punishment was just what it was.
Yeah.
So you learned that type of school I went to was designed to train young army officers in World War I to be the first over the top of the trench and first into the machine gun fire. The
Mhm.
average life expectancy of a young officer was 6 weeks. But you were that the whole, they thought they were training a kind of resilience of an override of fear. So we were all trained by the military. And there were certain things that were good about it and certain
Yeah.
things, of course, that weren't. And, but what we weren't given was wait, because you're supposed to follow orders. Of course, if you're in a different situation, let's say you're not the regular army, but you're the special forces, they then go into a different form of training where they say, learn to trust your gut.
Mhm.
Don't go die unnecessarily, because then you can't fulfill the mission.
Yeah.
Actually, then you do wait and say, well, what should we do or not do here? So it's quite interesting when I talk to my friends who went through the kind of follow orders, and then got drafted into special forces, and then all that stuff we told you about following orders, forget all that. Now, and I often feel that with the work with autism and horses, we're a bit like special forces people.
Mhm.
Instead of going to war with our fellow man, we're going to war with human unhappiness.
Yeah.
And I feel to a large degree we're often winning that war, partly because we understand about oxytocin, but also because that idea of learning to be resilient, learning to dance with danger and loss of balance, emotional, whatever, but by all means, take the time that is
Yeah.
natural
Yeah.
to need for that process,
Yeah. I also
including
think,
retreat from it if necessary, is okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's important also to mention that when you're talking about resilience, that a feeling of safety is part of the equation there. That
Indeed.
is part of building resilience, because I know we've been talking a lot about, you know, moving and doing things and going through situations, and that is all part of it too. But there equally is having the option to go back to safety that will often hugely
Oh, no,
increase
absolutely.
for
Absolutely. I mean, if you
building
come
it.
out
Yeah.
from behind the bush and find that you shouldn't be there, then you should probably retreat back behind the bush and have a think, you know, and that is called survival, that can lead to thriving, to be whipped out from behind the bush into the danger may or may not end well. But so what you talked about human environment, this is of course the only real safety at the end of the day. I feel that we are tribal social apes. And when we're in a hunter-gatherer situation, when we are middle of the food chain, not top of the food chain, we know that if conflict is allowed to go beyond a certain point, will fragment the community to the point where everybody will end up on their own and get eaten by the larger predators, because we can only thrive and survive when we operate as a group.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's all about, all those true human societies are all about conflict resolution, not about
Yeah.
feuding.
Yeah.
And
And also, what I
yeah,
think is part of it when you talk about hunter-gatherers, and part of the survival was also having a relationship with the land and nature around them. And I think that's also a piece that has gotten a little bit lost, and that
absolutely.
also takes away from that bottom line feeling of safety, because when you feel you can't properly relate to the land, it's hard to feel that you belong, and it's also hard to read the situation and to assess whether am I safe or not. So I think,
I so agree. This is really interesting. As you know, within Horseboy, one of the things which we encourage people to do is learn all the edible plants,
yeah.
because kids are going to put stuff in their mouth.
Mhm.
It may be that what they're putting in their mouth is actually necessary for their health. That the gut biome is really wise. When they go
Yeah.
for dandelion, they probably do need dandelion, but you
Mm.
also don't want them to eat something toxic. So you
Yeah.
need to know, and you need to be able to discern. And just like with your horses, you want them to eat the good stuff and not the bad stuff. But the horse, to a large degree, does make that. The gut biome of the horse does direct the horse's nervous system and brain, and to a
Yeah.
large degree humans. It's so interesting. You talked about the break, viewing humans as a threat, with COVID, and of course, just with the feuds within society. But we also know that since it goes before the Industrial Revolution, it goes back to a kind of Judeo-Christian outlook, I think, of being a man at war with nature, a man in dominion over nature.
Hmm.
This idea of nature as an adversary,
Yeah.
rather than that must be conquered or neutralized, rather
Yes.
than, of course, your principal ally,
Hmm.
because you are of it and it is of you. And,
Yeah.
it's so interesting when you hear people say, Oh, I don't like nature. I was like, yeah, but you're breathing oxygen, aren't you? That's nature. Well, I don't like nature. Yeah, but you're wearing clothes, aren't you? With it, even if they're synthetic, come from fossil forests. Whatever, however you want to put it, you're part of it, whether
Yeah,
whether you think you are or not.
you're eating plants. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
we
I
eat
mean,
nature. Yeah,
even this Zoom conversation we're on is driven by electricity, which is nature, silica, which is the natural. It's still nature. We know this. All right, but it's not an obvious forest or meadow. Okay. But I think that this has been driven into people, this fear of the very thing that we rely upon, each other and the environment that sustains us. Could it be more dysfunctional? Could it be more of a recipe for unhappiness? No, I don't think it could.
hmm
How interesting that we've arrived at this point. And then when we're dealing with our fellow humans who are suffering, because as you know, when we're doing our autism trainings, the problem is not autism. You can be super successful in life with autism. The problem is suffering that might
yeah,
be associated with certain symptoms or disorientation or nervous system oversensitivity or whatever. Sure, those things we can address, but the autism itself is a series of gifts. Same with any human state. Now that you've been working in that world for a while and you now have your own practice,
hmm
and particularly with this little boy Donatello, who's so interesting, who I also know, who's becoming verbal, and you're sort of,
yeah,
I've watched you go through that process with him and helping the whole family, helping
yes,
Layla, shout out to Layla, his excellent mother, and so on. As we move towards the sort of 2 hour mark here, I think we all know that humans think in extremes, and one of the extremes that we seem to have come to, both in the horse world and the human world now, is that rather than resilience, this idea of trauma being so celebrated that as a place where you stay, because it almost validates you. You can get a lot of validation on social media, for example. Why would I move through and say, oh, I no longer feel traumatized? Because then all of that peer likes that I'm getting for my, I feel so sad posts will go away. And I feel I won't have that support anymore. It's gotten to the point in the horse world where there's a growing section of saying, well, you can't even touch them. You can't put a bridle. You shouldn't ride them. You shouldn't touch them with a stick. You shouldn't this, you shouldn't that. And these are very, very extreme positions that are gaining traction, but don't seem to marry up with the way life actually rolls and
yeah,
nature actually rolls. You're developing your career at this point, so that conversation is going to get louder.
hmm
Where do you, what's the evolution of this? Is this just a fad? Is this just a phase and we'll get through it and come out on the other side of it to something more mature? Or are we going down a plug hole here? Or is it a bit of both? Because I think this is a conversation a lot of us are asking,
yeah,
and I don't think
yeah,
you need to give us a hard and fast answer, but
yeah.
just what are your thoughts on
I
this?
think it is closely connected to how will people deal with, as you say, that thing is going into trauma, going into dysfunctions and staying there. I've had an interesting couple of sessions with a medicine woman who's helped me. She specializes in grief work. And a big part of her work is she has a big emphasis on, yes, you go down, you meet the grief. She says it's like a spiral. It's like you might spiral down and you meet it there and you process it, you sit with it, you allow it to be, because the grieving process is the healing process. Rather than I have to get through my grief in order to heal, it is the healing process. And then she says, but then there's the second half of it that many people forget, is that you spiral up again. You then take what you learn and you say, what do I build from here? How will this experience fertilize what I'm building or the life I want to live, or kind of the most beautiful vision I have for how I could be feeling and what I could be doing. And I think you could apply that principle to fear, to trauma, to whatever you're going through, is that the process of going through it is the healing process. But don't forget the second part. And I think when you talk about, people getting very over careful with the horses, because I've been there too. I've been so frozen where I felt I couldn't touch my horse because I was inevitably going to do something that was not all right. And I think those are connected. I think it's that same thing where, yes, we want to, of course, think about welfare. We want to do the best by our horses. We want to look at all those things and consider them, but we don't want to get stuck there in a way that keeps us from seeking something that is joyful together,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, it depends on whether humans can find a way to have that second part of, okay, we're going to spiral down, but then we're going to spiral up. It's that dynamic, because that brings you back into life.
Can we do that with our horses as well? Yeah, if we find
Exactly.
ourselves.
It brings you back into action. It brings you, because there's nothing wrong with stepping back and considering what you're doing and assessing, do I need to change something? And listening to your horse, of course. But there's that thing, I felt that I was not there for my horse in a good way when I was stuck there. Meaning when I didn't dare to move, when I didn't dare to try anything. Because it kind of became that thing where everything had to be regulated, calm and perfect at all times. That also puts pressure on your horse. That's a lot of
Massively.
pressure, and it's not a great state to be. And I do know that the horse I was having at the time, she always had a really tense jaw. Even though she was well trained, I was kind to her, it was harmonious and stuff, but she was never allowed to be anything other than, in some ways, perfect, but meaning that I never allowed her to be anything other than regulated and calm. She always had to be in that place. And in some ways, I feel that also put tension into her. Whereas if I had allowed for more play, for more fun, for more movement, because so many times the thing that people nowadays call dysregulated is the thing that is actually regulating. It's a process of
It's the
getting
process
to a
of
regulated
regulating.
state.
You're so right.
Exactly. So not to take that. And I think that's where people get afraid when they see a horse do that, because they're like, something must be wrong, meaning they could be, if you turn them loose in an arena, they could be running and bucking and, doing things and be looking quite wild. And people think, whoa, something must be wrong. But it could actually just be the process of, this horse has energy and move that energy somewhere. And this is the process of getting back to a state where they are available.
It's the road to regulation. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
And what's so interesting too is that what you're saying makes me realize that, of course, the over desire to keep everything regulated all the time is none other than the desire to control.
Yeah.
And it's the same desire to control that was directed at, say, me when I was a boy at that type of school, where wild behavior would be instantly just physically punished, unless you were doing it in a way that they wanted you to do it, as in stick your bayonet into this sandbag.
Yeah. And it can be the
tackle this
same.
guy on the rugby field. Yeah.
It can be the same thing that you put on yourself when you're dealing with your mental health. Where you say,
Absolutely.
I have to be regulated. And it becomes this thing. It's another means of control, and it's not helpful.
But I also don't want to impose my dysregulation on somebody else, because that is another danger. Say, well, okay, so I have the right to be dysregulated, but that doesn't
No,
mean that I can then smash a bottle over your head, whether
no,
that's actually doing it or doing it in some
yeah.
emotional way.
But that's where we need, I think we probably in society need a broader knowledge base of what tools help you, because I learned a lot of that from working with people with autism, because they have a much lower tolerance for not
Yeah.
having their human needs met. So that it means now I know when I'm not feeling so great, anything that will help Donatello, I can do for
Mm.
myself and I will feel better. So they have taught me that, you know?
Well, I think what you've touched on there is this feeling of taking responsibility for. So
Yeah.
if I'm feeling dysregulated, I have to ask myself, even if my desire is to blame somebody else or take it out on somebody else, because, we're humans and we do that. There's that little part of me deep down that cries bullshit on myself and goes, no, Rue, it's not that other person's fault. You're just projecting that. I mean, occasionally someone has actually done something, but that's actually the minority of times, really.
Mm. But
It's much
still,
more.
you can still within that take responsibility for
Yeah,
yourself, which is actually an empowering thing.
absolutely.
So in any case, it's a good thing to be able to do.
100%. And then that allows one to see a way through, because also if I blame somebody else, then what I've done is I'm giving the solution over to that person. So if I say, I feel this way because of you, then really the only way I can feel better is if you make some unspecified change that might be a complete surprise to you and that you may or may not do.
Yeah.
But if I say, no, it lies with me, then I can go and do what I need to do for me, regardless of somebody else. And that could
Yeah.
not be more
And that
empowering,
does
really.
not
Yeah.
mean that other people cannot help you then do the
Yeah.
things that will make you feel better. But then you're coming from a place rather than, I'm going to take this out on you, you're coming from a place of saying, would you help me do this thing
Yes.
that will get me to a better place, which is a very different thing to come
Which
with.
involves love, right? Which involves
Yeah,
gratitude, which involves
exactly.
good emotions. Yes. Yes, it's
So
so
it doesn't, so
interesting.
not
Yeah.
meaning that it has to be a thing just because you take responsibility for it, that isolates you and means you have to do it yourself, but it just puts you in a position where engaging with people is, yeah, as you
Mm.
say, coming from a loving place rather than from this place of, I now have to use you so that I feel better.
It's what's gone from our culture currently. I mean, there's aspects of it in certain subcultures within our culture, but we don't really have spiritual guidance when you're when you're within nature all the time. And I think that's a lovely thing about horses is they are the living embodiment of nature. And then we're dealing with the natural environment all the time because that's what they need to thrive. Just being in nature is regulating, but also healing. It is its own spirituality. It is but it's still, there needs to be kind of a human focus to it. I feel each species probably has to have its own focus. So of course, within an indigenous human situation in nature, you have a shaman, you have a healer.
Yeah.
I have groups of them. Those of us who have sought that out in our lives, and of course I know you have found it immensely helpful, because go figure, it's what humans have always done. But
Yeah.
it's, of course, not really, and I guess where pilgrimage comes in and all, but it's not really offered on the list of options usually these days, because despite the fact that we're in nature, whether we like it or not, we have a perception that we're not. And one of the great
Yeah.
tools of that is to not have what that's missing is that person who takes on that role within a community, the medicine person. So in the absence of that, I often feel we're quite lucky, those of us who work with autism, because I often feel that I'm working kind of with a shaman when I'm next to
Yeah.
an autistic person, and that they provide me often with those insights and those perspectives. And
Absolutely.
because they're not competing with me in any way, there's no ego involved. And
Yeah.
so I can really learn from them in a way that my ego might defend itself from
Mhm, mhm.
if I was trying
Yeah,
to
and
learn it from
even
someone neurotypical.
yeah, even with a young child, just following and engaging with what they are engaging with will teach you so much. Because you're like, oh, they pay a lot of attention to this thing and they were really in depth engaged with something natural out in the forest that you might have just walked past. And I think it just helps us rebuild that relationship with nature also.
Yes. And you watch them, you really watch them face their fears.
Hmm.
And I find it's really inspirational. One of the
Hmm.
questions I often ask in trainings is whether it's horse trainings or trainings on the therapeutic line with humans is you, the person who are at this training, are wanting this horse or this human to make a change, big change. You want this kid to become verbal, or you want this horse to learn how to go in a trailer or whatever. This is a big deal. These are big deal things you're asking, huge changes. What
Yeah.
changes are you making? What changes are you engaged in? Are you currently learning another language? Are you currently doing something you kind of don't want to do, but
Hmm.
really in-depth engaging? And if the answer is no, then what tools have you got to help that other person with 2 legs or 4 to make a change? Because you're not making a change. They're going to look to you for leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
So I know that you are now helping families and also helping people with their horses in quite a few locations. That you obviously you do it in Germany, you do it up in Denmark, you do it in the UK, you do it in Ireland. You help families, you help people, you help horses. You're shortly about to start working a bit down in Spain as well. So you're mobile and you're available. If people, can you also do stuff with people online? How do people get hold of you, whether it's they want insights in starting their horse, if they want help with their kid, if they want help with themselves, or some combo of the above? How do they get in touch with Kira and engage you?
Yeah. I mean, the best way is probably I have a website. It's horse training focused. But if anyone is out there having, questions about work with children, work with special needs, work with mental health, you can still reach out even though the website at this point, because I'm still building everything. So at this point there's just horse training information on there, but there's there's even a contact form on there, the email address is there, and you can just get in touch with me there. And that website is horserealms.com.
Horse Realms,
Yeah.
RALMS
REALMS. Yeah.
.com, and
Yeah.
there'll be an email link to you on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
you can find me there. If you are a social media person, I am also on Instagram with varying activity though, but you know, my name there is very creatively Kira Horses. So that's also easy if you want to, you can
Kira
also find me
Horses
there.
on
Kira
Instagram.
Horses,
Right.
yes. So that
There
would probably be the easiest.
there were some things we didn't have time to touch on, but I'm sure you'll be able to talk with people about privately as they need to. I mean, you yourself use a lot of art in
Yes.
your own process, and you were talking about, finding things that are about joy, which might not be, which might be parallel with, but not directly associated with the problem that you're looking to solve, whether it's with a human or yourself or a horse. And also, the journeys you've made into the shamanic and the natural as well. But
Yeah.
I think what I would say to people who might be considering is, Kira's really put her money where her mouth is with that and has sort of delved quite deep. So I know that the insights that she's got are of great value, having gone through similar things myself. But also, I can vouch for if it's something really simple, like you are starting a colt or you are running into some issue with your horse, this person really has got solutions for you, as well as on the therapeutic end. Any last thoughts, burning desires, things people you'd like to be aware of, go away with thinking about? before we wrap?
Yeah, I'd just say, because there's such a big focus on healing these days, and I think that is great, I would encourage people to just take the perspective of the healing process is there in service of your life, not the other way around. You know what I mean? So do the healing in order to live. Don't spend your life healing. Because the living is also healing, but you know what I mean. The kind of the thing you consider the work you do to heal, have that be in service of your life.
Really love that. Yeah, get out there and live.
Yes. And you will find that for me, that was a truly healing thing. Writing in your storyline for your life. Yeah. Which only happens as you live it.
With all its varying things. Yes. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming
My
on.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so horserealms.com, and hopefully you'll come back on the show and we'll be able
Love
to
to.
see what you've done next.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.